Nuclear War, a Scenario by Annie Jacobson, presents a detailed and gripping depiction of what a nuclear war scenario could look like, particularly from the perspective of the United States. It is based on interviews with defense officials, nuclear scientists, and other experts, as well as declassified government documents. The book is structured into several parts, each depicting stages of a nuclear war and its consequences. 1. Prologue, Hell on Earth. The opening describes a devastating nuclear strike on Washington, D.C., triggered by a bolt-out-of-the-blue attack, where a thermonuclear bomb explodes over the Pentagon. The blast causes unimaginable destruction, killing millions within seconds and igniting fires that rapidly spread throughout the city. The prologue graphically illustrates the physical and human devastation caused by the attack. 2. Part 1. The Build-Up. This section delves into the history of nuclear war planning by the U.S. government, explaining how trillions of dollars were spent since the 1950s preparing for nuclear war. It highlights the secrecy surrounding these plans and the chilling realization that such a war would result in global devastation, with no real winners. Various defense experts and former government officials describe the preparations, which include protocols to keep the government functioning post-attack, even as millions of Americans would perish. 3. Part 2, the first 24 minutes. The narrative shifts to a more minute-by-minute account of what happens in the first moments after a nuclear missile launch. It details how satellites detect the launch, how defense systems react, and the panic that spreads among government officials and civilians alike. The complexity of responding to such a sudden attack is emphasized, showcasing the technological advancements in missile detection systems, such as the SBR, space-based infrared system, and the decision-making processes that would follow. Therefore, Part 3, the next 24 minutes, as the nuclear war unfolds, the story focuses on the chaos that ensues both in the targeted cities and in military command centers. The Pentagon's control over the U.S. nuclear arsenal and the global reach of its military responses becomes critical. The fallout from the nuclear explosions causes further destruction, while survivors begin to understand the full scope of the catastrophe. 5. Part 4, the next and final 24 minutes. The final moments before the full-scale collapse of society are explored. The book emphasizes the inevitability of total destruction once nuclear weapons are launched. Key cities and regions across the globe are targeted, resulting in the end of civilization as we know it. The psychological, social, and environmental consequences are horrifying. 6. Part 5, the next 24 months and beyond. The aftermath of the nuclear war is bleak. Survivors face radiation sickness, food shortages, and societal collapse. The narrative also touches on the global effects, including nuclear winter and long-term radiation exposure. Governments and militaries, which once planned for such a war, are shown as powerless to control the chaos that follows. Jacobson's work serves as both a warning and an in-depth exploration of the terrifying reality of nuclear war planning. The book stresses that despite decades of preparation, no one can truly prepare for the apocalyptic consequences of nuclear warfare. The author's research draws heavily on declassified material, interviews with high-ranking officials, and the analysis of past nuclear incidents, making the book a factual yet harrowing account of the very real possibility of nuclear conflict in the modern world. Nuclear War, a Scenario by Annie Jacobson, is a comprehensive and haunting exploration of the devastating consequences of a nuclear war, primarily focused on the United States' preparedness and the terrifying potential of such a conflict. Jacobson draws from interviews with top military officials, scientists, intelligence analysts, and government advisors, as well as declassified documents to construct a vivid and detailed scenario of a nuclear war. The book provides both historical context and a hypothetical future vision of what might happen in the event of a nuclear strike. Overview of the story. The book is divided into 5 main sections, each representing critical moments in the buildup, execution, and aftermath of a nuclear war. The scenario opens with a sudden, unanticipated nuclear strike, often referred to as a bolt out of the blue. This term, used by U.S. military planners, refers to an unwarned, large-scale nuclear attack that could catch even the best-prepared defense systems off guard. In this particular scenario, Washington, D.C. is the primary target, specifically the Pentagon, with the intention of crippling the United States' ability to respond or coordinate a defense. Prologue: Hell on Earth. The book begins by describing in gruesome detail the immediate effects of a 1-megaton thermonuclear bomb detonating over the Pentagon. The explosion causes unimaginable destruction, with temperatures reaching 180 million degrees Fahrenheit, instantly vaporizing everything within a mile of ground zero. The iconic Pentagon building, home to 27,000 workers, is obliterated in a fraction of a second, and the surrounding area, including Arlington National Cemetery, is turned to ash. Firestorms ignite across the city, spreading outward and engulfing everything in their path, killing millions within the first few seconds. The prologue sets a terrifying tone, as it paints an apocalyptic picture of a world in which nuclear war has begun. The sheer speed at which destruction occurs is horrifying, with only moments passing between the initial flash of light and the spread of devastation across a radius of several miles. As fireballs and shockwaves radiate outward, human lives are erased in an instant. The vivid depiction of these moments is meant to shock the reader into understanding the immediacy and finality of nuclear warfare. Part 1: The Buildup, or How We Got Here. In this section, Jacobson delves into the history of nuclear weapons development, focusing on how the U.S. government has spent trillions of dollars since the 1950s preparing for nuclear war. The development of nuclear weapons in the United States and later in other nations is traced back to World War II and the Manhattan Project, which led to the creation of the atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. After the war, the U.S. military and defense establishment continued to develop increasingly powerful nuclear weapons, transitioning from atomic bombs to thermonuclear or hydrogen bombs. These weapons are vastly more destructive, capable of obliterating entire cities in seconds. Jacobson explains how the U.S. military-industrial complex expanded its nuclear capabilities, stockpiling thousands of warheads by the 1960s, all while refining the protocols and contingency plans for a possible nuclear war. One of the key points in this section is the idea of deterrence, keeping an enormous nuclear arsenal as a means of preventing war by threatening mutually assured destruction, (MAD). Despite the public perception that nuclear weapons are meant to keep the peace, the book reveals that behind the scenes, military planners have been meticulously preparing for nuclear war, even rehearsing scenarios of mass extermination that could wipe out hundreds of millions of people in a matter of days. The section also covers the emergence of new threats during the Cold War, particularly from the Soviet Union, which led to an arms race between the two superpowers. By the late 20th century, both the U.S. and the Soviet Union had developed massive nuclear arsenals, each capable of ending human civilization. Part 2: The First 24 Minutes. This section provides a minute-by-minute account of what happens after a nuclear missile is launched. The scenario Jacobson outlines begins with North Korea launching an intercontinental ballistic missile, ICBM, capable of carrying a nuclear warhead. The U.S. military's early warning systems, particularly the Space-Based Infrared System, SBIRs, detect the missile within seconds of launch. This triggers alarms across various military installations, including the National Military Command Center at the Pentagon and the Cheyenne Mountain Complex in Colorado. As the missile is tracked in real time, defense officials scramble to determine its target, all while the clock ticks down. The narrative highlights the complexity of the U.S. defense systems designed to detect and respond to nuclear threats. Satellite sensors, ground-based radars, and a global network of intelligence agencies work together to assess the situation. But despite all this technological prowess, the human element of decision-making introduces moments of uncertainty and fear. The missile's trajectory is soon confirmed to be heading for the east coast of the United States, likely targeting Washington, D.C. As the missile travels toward its target, U.S. officials must decide whether to retaliate. The tension in these moments is palpable, as the fate of millions of lives rests in the hands of a few decision-makers. The scenario Jacobson presents is not just about the military logistics of nuclear warfare, but also about the psychological pressure on those tasked with making life-or-death decisions in an incredibly short amount of time. Part 3: The Next 24 Minutes. The next phase focuses on the aftermath of the initial nuclear strike. As Washington, D.C. burns, the U.S. military must respond, activating its own nuclear forces. The concept of second strike capability comes into play as the U.S. prepares to retaliate against North Korea with overwhelming force. However, the global implications of such a strike are dire. Russia, China, and other nuclear-armed nations are immediately on high alert, fearing that they may be the next targets. Jacobson emphasizes the inevitability of escalation once nuclear weapons are used. There is no such thing as a limited nuclear war. Even a single strike is likely to trigger a broader conflict that could involve multiple nations launching their nuclear arsenals. The result is a chain reaction that rapidly spirals out of control, leading to global devastation. The book paints a grim picture of the consequences of these retaliatory strikes. Major cities across the world are targeted, leading to the deaths of hundreds of millions of people within hours. The infrastructure of human civilization, communication networks, transportation systems, power grids, collapses, leaving survivors in a state of chaos. Part 4. The next and final 24 minutes. The final 24 minutes represent the tipping point beyond which there is no return. Once multiple nuclear weapons have been launched, the global landscape changes irreversibly. Jacobson illustrates how nuclear war is not just about the immediate destruction of cities, but also the long-term consequences for the planet. Fallout from the nuclear blasts begins to spread, carried by winds across continents. Radioactive particles contaminate the air, water, and soil, ensuring that even those far from the blast zones are affected. This part of the book also explores the psychological toll on survivors. Those who manage to escape the initial blasts are faced with the harsh reality of a world where basic necessities like food, water, and medical care are scarce. Society breaks down into chaos, and the survivors must fend for themselves in a brutal, post-apocalyptic landscape. Part V, the next 24 months and beyond, or where we are headed after a nuclear exchange. The final section of the book shifts focus to the long-term aftermath of a nuclear war. Jacobson explains how the world would be plunged into a nuclear winter, where the soot and ash from the fires caused by nuclear explosions block sunlight, leading to a dramatic drop in global temperatures. This would cause widespread crop failures, leading to famine on a massive scale. The environmental consequences of nuclear war are catastrophic. Radioactive fallout contaminates the environment for decades, rendering large parts of the planet uninhabitable. The survivors are left in a desolate world where governments have collapsed and the social order has disintegrated. The book makes it clear that nuclear war is not just a military conflict, but an existential threat to the survival of the human species. Jacobson concludes by reflecting on the dangerous path humanity is on, with nuclear weapons still playing a central role in global politics. Despite decades of arms control agreements and diplomatic efforts to prevent nuclear war, the risk remains ever present. The book serves as a stark warning of the catastrophic consequences of nuclear conflict, urging readers to consider the moral, ethical, and practical implications of living in a world where such weapons exist. Conclusion: Nuclear war, a scenario, is a meticulously researched and profoundly disturbing examination of what nuclear war would look like and how close we are to such a catastrophic event. Jacobson's use of real-life interviews, historical context, and declassified materials adds weight to her narrative, making it clear that nuclear war is not just a hypothetical threat, but a very real possibility. The book challenges readers to confront the horrifying reality of nuclear weapons and the devastating impact they would have on humanity and the planet.